first premolar. Let's have a look over the pulp cavities of maxillary first premolar. Right, picture. Let's have a discussion on buccolingual section. You can see this in figure 13.11a and d. Right, in picture you can see in the figure 13.11a 1 2 and 9 d 10 and 14. The maxillary first premolar having two well developed roots. In the figure 13.11a 3 5 7 and 8 d 11 12 13 15 16 and 17, you can see two root projections that are not fully separated. Two root projections that are not fully separated. And in figure 13.11a4 and 6d18 showing the one broad root. You can see in the figure 13.11a and d. You can see, we know that the majority of maxillary first premolars have two root canals. You can see this in figure 13.11a and d. A small percentage of maxillary first premolars may have three roots that may be almost undetectable radiographically. A small percentage of maxillary first premolar teeth may have three roots that may be almost undetectable radiographically. The pulp horn usually extends further incisally under the buccal cusp. Because this cusp is usually better developed than the lingual cusp, the pulp horn usually extends further incisally under the buccal cusp. Because this cusp is usually better developed than the lingual cusp, the pulp horns may be blunted. You can see this in figure 13.11a 1 5 and 6 d 11 in teeth possessing cusps that demonstrate a fair amount of attrition. You can see in the figure 13.11a 1 5 and 6 d 11 the pulp horns may be blunted in teeth possessing cusps that demonstrate a fair amount of attrition. The pulp chamber floor is below the cervical line of all the variations found in the maxillary first premolar. The pulp chamber floor is below the cervical level of all the variations found in the maxillary first premolar. Right. The pulp chambers of the teeth having the least root separation usually shows the largest incisal apical dimension. You can see this in figure 13.11a4 d18. Those teeth possessing a partial root separation may also have this large dimension. What dimension? The incisal apical dimension. You can see this in figure 13.11a8 d10. Teeth having two separate canals usually demonstrate a rather small pulp chamber in the incisal apical direction. You can appreciate this in figure 13.11a1 2 and 9 d 11 and 14. The shape of the pulp chamber excluding the pulp horns tends to be square. You can appreciate this in Figure 13.11 A1 and 8, B10, 12, 13, 14 and 18, or it may be rectangular. You can see this in figure 13.11 A2 through 7, D11, 15, 16 and 17. The root canal often appears to exit at the tip of the root. You can see this in figure 13.11 A 1, 4, 6, 7 and 8, and B 12, 13 and 15 through 18. Sometimes the root canal appears to exit at the slightly to the labial or lingual. You can see this in figure 13.11 A2, or a combination of the two locations. You can see this in figure 13.11 A3, 5 and 9, B 10, 11 and 14. Let's talk about the mesodistal section of this tooth in the figure 13.11 B and E. You can see the pulp horns appear blunted from the mesial or distal aspect, and the pulp chamber cannot be differentiated from the root canal or pulp canal. The pulp cavity tapers slightly from the occlusal aspect to the apical foramen. If two canals are present, the radio opacity will increase in the apical half of the tooth because of an increased amount of dentin and bone and a decrease in the volume of pulp cavity. The apical foramen appears to exit at the tip of the root most of the time. You can see this in figure 13.11 B1, 2, 3 and 6 through 9, E10 and 12 through 18. But some appear to exit on the mesial or distal aspects of the root. You can see this in the figure 13.11 B4 and 5 and E11. Cervical cross section. Let's talk about the cervical cross section, how the tooth appears and how its features will be. You can see this in figure 13.11 C. The cross section at the cervical level shows the kidney shaped outline form characteristic of the maxillary first premolar. You can see this in figure 13.11 C. A mesial developmental a mesial developmental groove is usually present, giving this tooth its classical indentation. The pulp cavity may demonstrate a constriction adjacent to the developmental groove. You can see this in figure 13.11 C 2, 3, 5, 6 and 9, or it may follow the general outline of the root surface. You can see this in figure 13.11 C 1, 4, 7 and 8. Some roots demonstrate two separate root canals. You can see this in figure 13.11 C 7, whereas a cross section of a three-rooted maxillary first premolar will show three separate canals. You can see this in figure 13.11 C 3. This is the figure 13.12 showing the maxillary second premolar. In picture A, you can see the buccolingual section exposing the mesial or distal aspect of the pulp cavity. This aspect does not appear on the dental radiographs. Important thing. Let's have a discussion on the buccolingual section in figure 13.12 A and D. Most maxillary second premolars have only one root and a canal. Two roots are possible, although two canals within a single root may also be found. The pulp cavity may demonstrate well developed pulp horns. You can see this in figure 13.12 A1, 2, 6, 7 and 8, D 10, 11, 12, 14, 16 and 17. Others may have blunted or non-existent pulp horns. You can see this in figure 13.12 A3, A3, 4, 5 and 9, D 13, 15 and 18. The pulp chamber and root canal are very broad in the buccolingual aspect of teeth with single canals. Right? The pulp cavity does not show a well-defined demarcation between the root cavity and the pulp cavity because of the large buccolingual extent of the pulp cavity in the upper half of the tooth. In the apical half or third of the tooth. In the apical half or third of the tooth, the pulp cavity often narrows abruptly. You can see in figure 13.12 A 1, 2, 4, 6 and 8, D 11, 12, 13 and 18, and then tapers gently towards the apex. Some teeth possess dentinal islands in the apical third of the root. Some teeth possess dentinal islands in the apical third of the root. This situation essentially forces the clinician to treat these as teeth with two canals. You can see this in figure 13.22 A5, D 15 and 17. Other maxillary second premolars have a canal that bifurcates at the apical third of the root. You can see this in figure 13.12 D10, 15 and 16. It should also be noted that buccal and lingual pulpal projections or fins are present at the level of the CEJ. You can see this in figure 13.12 A2, D 12 and 18. Some teeth show a constriction at this same level. You can see this in figure 13.12 D10. The apical foramen often appears to exit at the tip of the root. You can see in the figure 13.12 A1, 2, 5, 6 and 8, D 11, 12 and 14 through 18. Some apical foramina appear to exit on the buccal aspect of the root. You can see in the figure 13.12 A4, D 13 on the lingual aspect of the root. In the figure 13.12 A7 and 9 are on both sides of the root tip. You can see this in figure 13.12 A3, D10 and 15. Let's have a look over the mesodistal section. You can see in the figure 13.12 B and E. The view of the pulp cavity in the mesodistal section of the second maxillary premolar does not vary from that found found in the maxillary first premolar. The pulp horns are blunted and the pulp cavity tapers slightly from the occlusal aspect to the apex. The apical foramen may appear to be located off center of the tip of the root tip. You can see in the figure 13.12 A 2, 6 and 9, D 10 and 13 are appear to exit at the root tip. You can see in the figure 13.12 B 1, 3, 4, 5 and 8, E 11, 12 and 14 through 18. Let's discuss about the cervical cross section in figure 13.12c. The cervical cross section of the maxillary second premolar is usually oval. You can see this in figure 13.12 C 2 and 4 through 9, with some teeth having a kidney shaped cross section. You can see this in figure 13.12 C 1, 12 C 1 and 3. The pulp cavity is centered in the root and may have a constriction in the middle of the canal space. You can see this in figure 13.12 C 1, 4, 6 and 9, and an entire separation in figure 13.12 C 2 or an elliptical pulp cavity in figure 13.12 C 3, 5, 7 and 8.